Bats in the attic. Bats in the attic. Focus question. What does the child learn from their experiences on summer vacation? Introduction. When I was 9 years old, I spent the summer visiting my great-grandmother, whom I called Gram. She lived in a large, gray cedar shakes house by the ocean. Gram let me pick which upstairs bedroom I wanted to stay in, so I chose the yellow one because its window faced the beach. I had many adventures that summer, including ones with horseshoe crabs, sandcastles, and ants. My last adventure began when I heard some strange sounds outside my bedroom window. I looked out and saw winged creatures flying around an outside light. These brown, flying animals seemed to fly back and forth from the house. I thought Graham's house might have bats in the attic. Research. I had never climbed up the steep stairs to the third floor, but Graham had told me it was her attic. The strange sounds outside made me curious about what was in that part of the house. I decided to tell Graham about the bats the next morning. I planned to ask her if Jim could go with me to see how the bats were getting into the house. Jim was Graham's friend who helped her with chores around the house. He often stopped by to visit. The next morning, while having a breakfast of oatmeal with lots of maple syrup, I told Graham what I had seen and heard the night before. Graham thought she didn't think the bats were living in the attic, but it would be a good idea to have Jim and me it out and next time he came to visit. Graham suggested that I ride my bike to the library to read all I could about bats. I was surprised when he told me that she didn't want the bats to go away, but she didn't want them to live in her house either. The town's library was small, and the librarian knew me from previous visits. The summer I had read books about sandcastles, horseshoe crabs, and ants, as well as books about tides and the ocean. Now I wanted books about bats. The librarian helped me find many books, and I sat down to look through them. Some books were too difficult and some were too easy. I found 3 books that I thought could teach me what I wanted to learn, checked me out, and rode my bicycle home. Blind as a bat. Bats are very interesting creatures. I learned that they are divided into 2 categories, megabats and microbats. Megabats can have a wingspan of 6 feet. Thank goodness the bats as Grams were microbats, which are about the size of a hamster. Megabats live where it is warm all year, and they eat mostly fruit and nectar. Microbats live in many parts of the world and eat mostly insects. I was pretty sure Grams bats were called Aptislichus fuscus, or big brown bats. Once I read further, I learned one bat could eat 600 to 1,000 mosquito-sized insects in an hour. Now I knew why Graham wanted to keep them near. I first suspected bats were related to mice, but I read that bats are more closely related to humans. A bat's wing is like a human hand with 4 fingers and a thumb. The bat's arm had a forearm, an elbow, and an upper arm. Bats' fingers are long and have a double layer of skin connecting them. The skin is so thin that you can almost see through it. Bats feed milk to their newborns called pups, the same way other mammals do. Bats, like all mammals, have hair or fur on their bodies and warm-blooded, and have claws or fingernails. It is strange to think of those flying figures outside the bedroom window as mammals. Obviously, they were not flying rats. I had heard the expression blind as a bat used by many people. In my reading, I found out that bats are not blind. They use their eyesight during daylight and early evening hours. At night, of course, they need more than sight to catch flying insects and to fly around without hurting themselves. They do this by using echolocation. The bat makes sounds from its mouth or nose that bounces off solid objects and echo back, which tells the bat the location of the object, including insects. searching for bats. The next time Jim came for breakfast, I asked him if he'd go with me to look for bats in the attic. As we climbed the narrow, steep stairs, Jim told me not to touch any bats we found. I told him I had read that only a few bats have rabies, but humans still should not touch or frighten them. Jim was glad I had done some research. He said it was good we both knew what to do and what not to do to stay safe around wildlife. The attic was full of old things, such as furniture, boxes, and old pictures. Jim shone a flashlight onto the ceiling, looking for bats. We also looked all over the floor for bats' droppings. We found nothing. The bats had to be living in the walls. In one of the books I had read, I learned how to remove bats from a horse. The book said not to disturb bats during the summer months in case were there were young pups that would not be able to follow their parents to a new home. Graham would have to wait a couple more weeks until September to take steps to protect her house against any more bats living in it. I gave her the book and explained how to keep bats out so she would know what to do. I asked Jim to help me build a bat house. The bat house would attract bats so they would stay near Graham's house to eat insects. When we were finished, Jim fastened the bat house near the edge of Graham's roof where I had seen the bats coming and going at dusk. I hoped the bats would learn to live in the new home we made for them. Clam digging. My summer was coming to a close. Labor Day was just a week away. I loved living at the shore and not ready to leave. I missed my family and friends in the city, but I wished we lived closer to Graham. One evening, Jim and Graham told me they had a surprise for me. The next day, we were going to clam digging. There was a full moon by that night, which means the tide would ebb or pull away from the shore farther than usual. In the morning, we would be able to dig clams they were normally covered by the ocean. We would need to leave Graham's house by 6 a.m. Graham, Jim, and I had a quick breakfast of cereal and orange juice. We had a short divide to a secluded beach. When we arrived, Jim handed me a wire bucket and a jug of water. He carried a potato hoe that looked like a rake with 6 long tines, and a big iron kettle. Graham carried a blanket and a picnic basket. Graham and Jim showed me which dimples or holes in the sand should yield clams. Jim would find a dimple but put the hoe on the ocean side of the clam and push down, gently bringing the sand out. It was my job to grab the clam and put it into the bucket. Clams dug down deeper into the sand to escape, so sometimes Jim had to keep digging. Clams also defended themselves by shooting a stream of water out of the hole as we stepped near them. After a while, Jim handed me the hoe to try clam digging. I could not dig fast enough at first, but when I uncovered my first clam, I was high-fiving Graham and Jim with happiness. Graham would swoosh the bucket of clams in the ocean water to remove sand from their shells. Sometimes seagulls would see a clam's snout near the surface, grab it, and fly off with it for a meal. I shooed the gulls away when they came too near to our digging. Graham told me that we might dig up a few bloodworms, as their holes in the sand look very similar to clam holes. I was very glad we didn't found a bloodworm that day. They can give humans nasty bites. Bon appetit! Once we had collected quite a few clams, Graham and I looked for driftwood. We were at a private beach where we were allowed to build a fire. When we had our arms full of all sizes of wood, we headed back to Jim. He had the bucket full of doors and clams and was washing the last ones in the ocean. Graham put the clams into her kettle and poured the jug of water over them to remove as much sand as possible. Jim built the fire, poured the water off the clams, and set the kettle atop the fire to cook. As the clouds steamed, Graham sat on the blanket watching Jim and me make a sand castle. Glen called as when the clams opened their shells. She put some salt, pepper, and butter on them. They were a grayish color when we dug them. Now cooked. They were almost white. Graham put on one on a plate and showed me how to remove the skin on the snout. Then she gave it to me to eat. Bon appetit, said Tim. Enjoy. The clams were delicious. With fresh bread and ice-cold lemonade, this was the best meal I had ever tasted. Goodbyes. Graham, Jim, and I went for a long walk on the beach and waded along the shore after a lunch of delicious clams. I was feeling sad that I would soon be taking the train back north to the city and home. Graham noticed that I was unhappy. She gave me a hug and told me not to worry. You'll be back soon, now that you have sand in your shoes. Seagulls kept flying to a pair of huge rocks nearby. Jim helped me climb to the top so I could see what the birds liked so much. On top, I found a small pool of water. I felt very tall standing on the rock. I could see far out to the ocean and up and down the beach. This was a perfect place for seagulls to perch. This was a perfect place for me to say my goodbyes.